Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
But who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And what he do?
And it's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts. I'm Bruce Rivers, board-certified criminal defense lawyer, which means I actually go to trial. I don't just hold your hand and plead you guilty. Today, we are reacting to more of the Johnny Depp saga. Two things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the psychologist testifying on the defense side, and then also Amber Heard's testimony. We'll kind of analyze both. Now, the procedure in this case, this is a case, obviously, where Johnny Depp has sued Amber Heard for $50 million. She's countersued for $100 million. And so she has claimed that she's got PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And because she's claiming that, what that has done is put that in her mental health into play. So Johnny Depp, as we did in our last video, we showed you that she had a psychologist, or Johnny Depp hired a psychologist to do an independent medical exam. Well, today we're going to analyze her own psychologist that she hired to review her records and do a diagnosis. And then we also will talk a little bit about her testimony. Now, in this case, the judges only allotted so much time for each side to present their arguments. And the judge said, look, if you get in the middle of a witness and your time is up, your time is up, and that'll be it. But here's the other thing. Now, Amber Heard testified this week on direct examination, and she's under what's called a sequestration order. That means she can't talk to anybody about her testimony at all, including her own lawyers. Now, do we think that probably is happening? Probably. I mean, it's a pretty risky thing to do, because if there's any conversation that she has about her testimony at all, the judge will strike her entire testimony. So while this weekend is going on, she can't practice lines or do anything with her own lawyers, because next up is cross-examination. There is so much fodder here for cross-examination. Johnny Depp's team has got to be very focused, and not like the defense has been. The defense is, they'll ask just the most inane questions over and over again, and they're really objectionable, but they're just burning up time. So, when you ask the question like, when did you stop beating your wife? And you say, I've never beat my wife. And then you ask, okay, well, when you were beating your wife, the sky was blue, wasn't it? And, and they kept going down that road over and over again. What the lawyer says isn't evidence. The answers are evidence. So just because and I think what the defense team is doing here is completely ineffective. They're going over and over again these questions that they're getting no's to, but they think they're getting out a dialogue or a narrative that just isn't true. So let's kind of dive into the forensic psychologist that Amber Heard and her team have hired.
When you're talking about intimate partner violence, you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes.
So one of the issues that he brings up right off the bat is gendered stereotypes. Now, I see this all the time in my practice, where you have an expert who's basically there to vouch for the witness. And this person has examined Amber Heard, and she hasn't examined Johnny Depp. She really hasn't taken any of Johnny Depp's side of things into account. And it's unclear as to how much video and audio evidence that she has seen. But as she goes on to testify, it is so clear that she is so gender biased that that Amber is all good and Johnny is all bad.
Stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go.
And so that's an important statement. You can't always assume that the male is the perpetrator and that the female is the victim. But she goes on to do just that.
Into the evaluation, understanding that the male also could be the victim of intimate partner violence.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Heard was the victim of intimate partner violence. That is why.
So, and she's hearing Amber Heard's story, and she's a hired gun for Amber Heard. So, and just like the other psychologist was a hired gun for Johnny Depp. But when you play some of the, when you play some of her, and we're going to analyze Amber Heard's testimony in a minute here, but when you go back and you look at some of the things, like she shit in a bed, and she said it was a practical joke, and she shit on his side of the bed. Who does that? Who starts a physical fight? And we'll play some of that, but her testimony is 100% gender bias.
Why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women get into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. Woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. And then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did, because I was referencing this case where I found Ms. Heard to be the victim of intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
Now, if you look at Johnny Depp's lawyers, they don't have the invective. They don't have the snarkiness. They are more measured. And the class of lawyers is really a stark difference.
They do.
Nearly every time you referenced the perpetrator of IPV, you used he or him, didn't you?
And it goes back to the same reasoning as I'm describing my understanding and my evaluation in this matter. Of course, men can be perpetrators and victims of intimate partner violence. That's well established in the research, and that's well established in my clinical practice as well.
Isn't the reason that you used the pronouns that you did that you almost always testify on behalf of a woman?
That's not correct.
You don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult.
So, when you look, she talks about, okay, that's a way when you when he says to her, you don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man. What he's trying to get out is her own bias, right? That she is, she's never testified where the man was a victim of IPV. Now, that's intimate partner violence. The things she just referenced there, a coach, a camp counselor, a priest, whatever the heck, they're all, first of all, they're all male on male, number one. And number two, they have nothing to do with IPV. They have nothing to do with, violence between a man and a woman.
I see them in therapy. I see them in forensic matters, in criminal cases. So I treat and evaluate men all the time.
I didn't ask you about treatment. I asked you about testimony. You broke out your practice between.
See, if Now, I don't like to criticize another lawyer for doing their job, but I do kind of, that was a perfect spot for the lawyer to look at her and say, well, yeah, but those, number one, those are all male on male, correct? And number two, they have nothing to do with an intimate partner relationship, right? And then she'd have to say yes. I mean, and so, and that kind of, that takes away her credibility almost immediately. But here's the thing. This case isn't going to come down to experts, in all honesty. This is going to come down to he said, she said, and the most important evidence in this case is going to be the actual recordings and the people that were around them that heard and saw this or that.
Between treatment and testimony. I'm not asking about treatment. When's the last time you testified on behalf of a man?
I testified recently in a deposition on behalf of a man who was traumatized because he was wrongly convicted.
At the time of
Because he was wrongly convicted. Convicted of what? Not IPV, I can guarantee you that.
your deposition 6 weeks ago, you couldn't remember a single time you had testified on behalf of a man.
I testified in my deposition that I testified in a case of a man who was wrongly convicted about 20 years and suffered physical and sexual violence in prison, and I detailed the traumatic effects of that happened on that gentleman.
Again, male on male.
March 28th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to page 77.
And it's a common cross-examination technique when somebody doesn't give the answer that you think is the right answer or inconsistent with some of their prior testimony. You confront them with a prior statement and you show them the statement and then say, isn't it true on this particular occasion you testified to X, which is what he's doing here.
Let's look at
and it goes to the adage, you don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. So when he asked for that question, he knew exactly where he could find the answer that he's looking for.
page 78, line 8. So you can't recall a single instance where you were hired by the attorney representing the male in an IPV matter, correct?
In an IPV matter, not in a trauma matter or a child sexual abuse matter.
Okay, so that's the distinction. You don't have any recollection of ever testifying on behalf of a male in an IPV matter.
As I stated yesterday, the very first case that I testified in was in a same-sex intimate partner violence where the man...
See, same sex. So it's two gay guys, intimate partner violence between two guys, not between a man and a woman. And that's the distinction.
Was the victim of another man. I routinely treat and assess same-sex couples where then the female can be the perpetrator of another female, and the male can be the perpetrator or a victim of his partner.
So, let me get this. You testified in a case where one male is alleged to have engaged in IPV against another male.
Correct.
All right. Okay. But that's the only one you remember. That's the only one you remember.
No, I've done this frequently. As you well know, most cases don't go to trial. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've limited to testimony. Many cases don't come to trial, but I've issued reports and worked on many cases of same-sex intimate partner violence where men are the victims.
But I did ask you about testimony, and I limited the question to testimony. And the only testimony that you remember is the same-sex couple, right?
There were multiple same-sex couples, I believe, that I testified
That you
in.
testified in court at trial.
I believe so, yes.
All right, but you didn't remember that in March.
I did remember that in March.
Okay. You're a professional witness, correct?
That's not correct.
So when you're dealing with somebody that's got an advanced degree, like a psychologist or another kind of doctor or an expert in any kind of field, you have to be careful not to run the risk of overplaying your hand, because if you give them a little wiggle room, they're going to be able to defend themselves and they're going to be pretty agile on their feet. And she seems be pretty agile.
No, you make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying in court, correct?
That is not
Not
correct.
testifying in court, I conduct thorough, comprehensive psychological evaluations of individuals who are.
That's kind of a method of trying to discredit an expert witness, but based upon how much money that they receive. And I don't think it's all that effective, because nobody believes that, unless they're a complete whore. Nobody really is going to believe that this psychologist is going to lie like crazy just for the money. But they do shade their opinions in a light most favorable to the person that's hiring them. That's for sure.
Involved in a court case. The majority of those cases never show up in a courtroom. And half of my practice and half of my income is about my clinical work with people who are coming to me for therapy.
I didn't ask you about the other half of your income. I'm asking you whether you made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying as an expert witness in court.
As you're phrasing that question, that's not correct. That would be the amount of income that I generate from my forensic practice. I testify perhaps maybe once or twice a year. Most of the work is done behind the scenes in evaluating individuals and issuing reports.
But you'll agree with me that a big part of that practice is providing expert witness testimony.
That's not correct.
No? That's not a big part of your practice.
If I testify twice a year, that's not a big part of my practice. All the other time is doing the work for the cases and evaluating the individuals and issuing reports.
Right. What percentage of work do you devote to forensic psychology?
As I stated yesterday, I say half and half clinical, half forensic, but I also have a substantial amount of time that I use in the professional activities and serving on professional boards.
So what portion of your practice do you provide expert witness services?
I think you're using the expert witness services synonymous with the forensic psychology part of the practice. So the forensic psychology practice,
So that's just a snippet of her psychologist. So let's kind of move on a little bit to the first time that Amber Heard testifies about the first time that Johnny hit her.
I tried to, this is after he stopped talking to me for some time, didn't tell me why. When he came back in my life, he wouldn't explain why he was acting different. He just kind of acted mad at me, didn't know what I had done wrong. And when I brought up the dress and the event, because it was an event to support a charity I was really involved with at the time, and I said, you know, did you see that thing? And he said, yeah, I think the whole world saw that kid. That's how they'll remember you. That's how the world will remember you. And I was like, oh, come on. I mean, it's like, but it, you know, I felt good in it.
At this point, I think I would have objected at least 2 to 3 times. And I don't want to criticize another lawyer necessarily, because they've got their own strategy and how they're doing things. But she's kind of going off on just a tangent.
I felt good. And he said, yeah, kid, that's what you're putting out there in the world. No one will ever forget that. And that's all they'll see you as.
Objection, Your Honor, narrative.
That's what you wanted. That's what you were going for. You know, my dress was low cut. I get it. It's low cut. But I felt, I felt really embarrassed and horrible that I wore that. I felt like, how could I have made that choice? Of course, you know, he's right. You know, you start to believe it. I started to believe that made a lot of sense, of course. But it didn't stop with that. It was clothing in general. And when I walked out of the house, it wasn't just like, hey, you're not allowed to wear that. It was like, oh, really? That's what you're wearing. No wonder you get cast in those roles. No wonder you.
See, I mean, she's overacting here, in my opinion. And I know I've gotten a lot of comments, or not a lot of comments, some comments where they say, oh, you picked a side, you know, she's a victim, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. I don't buy that for a minute. I've watched a lot of this trial, and I've listened to a lot of the recordings. There's nothing backing up the shit that she's talking about.
That's what you are. That's what you're making it. And it continued. And then there would be a blow up. And at first it was just to throw something, smash some things.
Notice there's no context to the blow up. There's no reason to be, just because she went out and went to a red carpet event with a low-cut dress. That's enough to fucking blow it up? Are you kidding me?
He loves to smash up a place, an apartment, furniture. That's what it started with. Glass. Threw a glass at me, and I remember it was summer. And he just threw this glass across the kitchen, and it didn't hit me, but it shattered behind me, and I remember thinking that it very easily could have hit me. And that, calling me a whore, it didn't start with using the whore word, it was just comments. Until it would escalate. And then I started to notice the pattern of escalation where he'd throw glass or turn over a table. Then he would hit the wall, and then he'd hit the wall really close to my head.
See, we're not really talking about the first time that he hit her, and that was the question. And now it's just a complete fucking word salad of whatever, what a piece of shit Johnny is, and all this jet.
When I'm standing there, just hit the wall, screaming at me. But then he would disappear and get clean and sober, and he'd come back and tell me that he was done drinking, he was over it, he was done, cleaned himself up, he had done it before, and he'd do it again.
What does this have anything to do with the first time she ever fucking hit her?
Again. And then he would go back to this, wonderful, almost just unreal, but real, but unbelievably nice, sensitive, kind, warm, generous, interesting, funny man that I loved. And he would make me feel so loved, I would feel so distant from that thing that was so scary that I would not even recognize it too. And that was how, our relationship kind of started to develop in that first year.
Do you remember the first time that he physically hit you?
Yes.
Please tell the jury about it.
It's seemingly so stupid, so insignificant. I will never forget it. It changed my life. I was sitting on the couch, and we were talking. We were having a normal conversation, there was no fighting, no argument, nothing. And he was drinking, and I didn't realize at the time, but I think he was using cocaine because it was there was a jar of cocaine out on the table. I realize that sounds weird, but it was an actual vintage jar of it. But I didn't see him use it at the time, so I didn't really factor that in. I just, he's drinking and we're talking, and there's music playing, and he's smoking cigarettes, and we're sitting next to each other on the couch. And I asked him about the tattoo he has on his arm. And to me, it just looked like black marks. I didn't know what it said. It just looked like muddled, faded tattoo that was hard to read. And I said, what does it say? And he said it says wino. It says wino. And I didn't see that. I thought he was joking because it didn't look like it said that at all. And I laughed. It was that simple. I just laughed because I thought he was joking.
So now here comes the waterworks, and here comes where it really doesn't make any sense.
And slapped me across the face. And I laughed. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. I thought, this must be a joke. This must be a joke. Because I didn't know what was going on. I just stared at him, kind of laughing still, thinking that he was going to start laughing too to tell me it was a joke, but he didn't. He said, "You think it's so funny? You think it's funny, bitch? You think you're a funny bitch?" And he slapped me again. It was clear it wasn't a joke anymore. And I stopped laughing, but I didn't know what else to do. You know, I didn't know what to do. You would think you would have a response, but
See, she's kind of led to just go on and on and on and on. And I suppose the defense team also might have another strategy. Let her dig her own grave, and because the more she talks, the less believable I think she is. Actually,
I, as a woman, had never been hit like that.
And your immediate
I'm an
response
adult,
is
and
to
I'm
laugh.
sitting next to the man I love, and he slapped me for no reason. It seemed like, and I missed the point. It was that stupid. Second slap, I know he's not kidding, but I don't know what else to say or do, so I just stared at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't react. I didn't move or freak out or defend myself or say, "What are you doing? You're crazy." I just stared at him because I didn't know what else to do. And he slaps me one more time. Hard. I lose my balance. At this point, we're sitting next to each other on the edge of the couch, or I was on the edge of the couch. And I'm all of a sudden realizing that the worst thing has just happened to me that could possibly happen to you. I realize that I wish so much he had said he was joking.
Okay, does that make any sense? I mean, she's acting here. She's absolutely 100% acting.
Because it didn't hurt. It didn't physically hurt me. I was just sitting there on this carpet, looking at the dirty carpet, wondering how I wound up on this.
Did you see that? She was on the couch. Now she's on the carpet, on this dirty carpet. It just, the mechanics of what she's talking about.
This carpet, and why I never noticed that the carpet was so filthy before, and I just didn't know what else to do.
And when people, we're going to do another thing here shortly, has a body language expert, and what they talk about there is when people are lying, a lot of times, they'll come up with just details that are completely irrelevant, so it sounds more believable, but it isn't.
I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. I just sat there thinking, how much time do I have till I figure out what I need to do? Because, God, did he just hit me? No, I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want this to be the reality. I didn't want to have the man I was in love with.
She sounds like she's crying. She sounds like she's sad. But there are no tears. No tears.
I know you don't come back from that. I'm not dumb. I know you can't hit a woman. You can't hit a man. You can't hit anyone. You can't just hit somebody because I knew it was wrong, and I knew that I had to leave him. And that's what broke my heart, because I didn't want to leave him. I thought if I got up out of that room, I'd leave the best thing that ever happened to me.
The best thing to ever happen to me. A guy that is a cocaine-fueled drunk who beats the shit out of you. That's the best thing that ever happened to you?
And I wish I could sit here and say I stood up and I walked out of that house and I drew a line and I stood up for myself. But I was just looking at the dirty carpet trying to will myself to get up, to walk out.
Okay, that's enough of that shit. So that's her describing the first time. Let's now shift focus a little bit and look at what the body language expert says.
Painful this is. This is horrible for me to sit here for weeks and relive everything. Hear people that I knew, some well, some not. My ex-husband, with whom I shared a life. Speak.
Now keep in mind this is on direct examination. So in direct, that's where you ask questions that are open-ended, like what happened next, and can you describe this?
about our lives in the way that they have. This is the most painful and difficult thing I've ever gone through.
Janine Driver, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from Amber Heard there?
Listen, Vinny, I wish we had an hour together. I could do a special on this today.
Well, we have a show every night, so don't worry. We'll have plenty of time.
Good. You'll have me back. So we see just at the end of that clip there, Amber sucked in her lip and bites her lip. This is concern and stress. The nerves of our lips are stimulated by her sucking in her lip like that. It's as if back in the day when we sucked our thumb, it's that comforting gesture. So we see that. The problem with Amber in her testimony is that she does all these start-stop sentences. This is congruent with someone who is being deceptive. In the clips you played earlier, it's interesting because her percentages are off. You know, the question was, do you remember the first time you were hit? And she says yes, and she stacks the deck at the beginning. This is something we saw with Jussie Smollett, who staged a hate crime in Chicago a couple of years ago. He did.
That's what I said earlier, how they stack the deck with, seemingly true facts, but that are completely irrelevant to anything.
Did a huge percent, about 60% up front in his story. The actual incident where this bad stuff happened to him was like 20%, and then a short after. We're seeing the same thing here with Amber Heard. She's stacking the deck up front. She gives us this big stress about how much cocaine he had in this bottle. She's giving us irrelevant information. Liars will often do this, Vinny. They'll give us a lot of truthful information at the front. They're stacking the deck, right? They're telling us all these things are truthful. I believe that the cocaine was there. I believe it was a big bottle. I believe they were sitting on the couch together. The problem is when she gets to the actual attack, it is such a small percent. It's maybe 15%. We have a big before, a big after. The incident itself is small. The percentages are off here. We're always looking for about 30% up front, 20 to 30%, 50% of the attack, and then we're looking for a small after. What happened after? It should be really short, maybe 10, 15, no more than 20%.
And that's because when somebody's making up a story, they can tell you over and over again what really happened, like leading up to whatever. But when you have just a small window that they're making up, they gloss over it. And they keep it down to a bare minimum.
And so her percentage is off. Also, I want to talk about something called statement analysis, if I may. One of the things when she said, he slapped me, I want you to re-listen to it over and over again. She doesn't say he slapped me. She says, slapped me. She drops the pronoun, and when people are being deceptive, Vinny, people will have a change in pronouns or they'll drop it. She doesn't say, he slapped me. She also changes her tense. So she goes from slapped. The first one's a slapped. The second one's a slapped, past tense. The third one is a slap. That is current tense. When people are making up a story, they'll talk in current tense. I wrote down some of the things. She then said, before I knew it, he starts crying instead of he started crying. Her current tense to past tense is indicative of someone who's making up a story in the spot. I think parts of it are true and many of it is deceptive. And that's why anyone in law enforcement watching this, I spoke to law enforcement earlier today. It's laughable, sadly, what she's doing on the court.
So that's a communication expert. She actually trains FBI, and I have to quite agree with her. So I thought those two analysis of taking a look at what she says and then having somebody who's a communication expert analyze her story for truthfulness. Now, clearly somebody like that is not going to be admissible in court. Otherwise, they'd have her analyze in court. But it gives you kind of a sense of what to look for when in Amber's testimony. Now, here's the other thing. So come Monday, she'll be cross-examined by the defense. And the defense has got all kinds of arrows in their quiver. They've got the shitting on the bed. They've got the recording of her starting a physical fight and calling Johnny a baby because she smacked him and he's bitching about it. They've got all kinds of other things. And they also have a real lack of corroboration, like the incident that happened in Australia. And the defense, I think, or the Johnny Depp's team also has something up their sleeve. There's something about Kate Moss, and I don't exactly know what it is, but there was a fist bump when they started talking about Kate Moss because I think they opened the door to that. So we'll see. We'll continue to do the reactions on the Depp trial. It is very interesting, and now remember, cross-examination, you control the witness. You can't ask leading questions on direct, but you can on cross. And when you ask, isn't it true that this? Isn't it true that that? Isn't it true that this? And on this particular occasion, isn't it true? And so you control it with yes or no questions. And you can rest assured when the Johnny Depp's team is cross-examining, they're going to play every damning recording that they possibly can. And there really isn't a single record. And it's funny how somebody like this would take a picture of Johnny Depp just sleeping. There's only one reason to do that, and that's to have some damning information about him later. Anyway, so this is Bruce Rivers. This has been our reaction to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. And we'll continue to follow up next week, and we'll see you next time here on Criminal Lawyer Reacts. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, subscribe, like the video, spread the word, and sign up for Patreon, because we are doing some damn good work on Patreon. See you next time on Criminal Lawyer Reacts.